Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's also Running on Ice, the newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/running on ice. Today, we welcome Kevin Wilson, Director of Engineering and Manufacturing at Polar King International. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you for having me.
I am excited to get into today. We're kind of going in like that 1 to 2 month AIM Act review, seeing kind of how people are starting to make this transition. But before we get too far into that, let's get some background on you and kind of how you got started at Polar King.
Okay. As of this Friday, March 7th, that'll be my third year here at Polar King. And this will be as of May of this year, it'll be my 40th year in the industry as it pertains to commercial refrigeration, air conditioning. And I've literally been all over the country with a lot of different uh, OEMs and manufacturers. So the culmination was that, as I've done that and the different experiences I've had, which just about anything you can imagine in operations to, being able to run some of those businesses, later on in my career. And, in the case of Polar King, it was unique because, I first started out as a, competitor against, Polar King and, worked for a company that made, similar product, an outdoor one-piece walk-in, and got to know him that way. And then recently, before in the past, 5 years or so, or was actually a supplier to them. And so that's where I got to really know the personnel here, Dave Schinkel, president of the company, and got to see the facility. And so when the time came for me to make another career move, um, Polar King was one of the ones I had high on my list, and it all worked out. And like I say, I'm been here already 3 years at the end of this week, so it's been a great experience, great people, great family-run business, and I'm very pleased that I'm here.
I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of Polar King, but also, it sounds like you truly might be the ultimate expert in all things like refrigerant because you just you've seen everything. You've seen it all. You've probably been through 600 million different versions of an AIM Act of just changing how things are cold.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know that there's been an evolution in both the refrigerants and as it pertains to the controls over the years, and then, people realizing that, the old HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, can be a detriment to the environment, especially from a greenhouse gas situation. And so there's been a huge focus, basically in the last 10 years, and the AIM Act went into effect. It became federal law. It was passed by Congress in December of 2020. And now we're up against the when some of the timelines have started being enacted. And so we've been aggressively working on that, as just about all of our competitors and our suppliers have.
Okay, so I want to get into this AIM Act, and we've talked about it before on the show, kind of before those timelines and some of those, you had to start making steps towards changes.
Right.
Because I know Congress signed it, and then we had to take a couple years to push it back and figure out what that looks like on the day to day. So, do you mind? And the full thing is spelled out as the American Innovation Manufacturing Act. Do
That's
you mind kind of giving us a quick overview of what it is and kind of or why like, what it is, kind of the gist behind it, and then how it's impacting the cold chain?
Yeah. So basically the gist behind it, as you say, is that they wanted to have a plant put together where we would, you know, start reducing the amount of refrigerants that have a high global warming potential, and also restrict the amount of equipment that's out there that could also have that high global warming potential refrigerant inside them. And so that's really the gist of how this was developed. There were some timelines put into place, and for Polar King in particular, for our products and the way we use them. Our big deadline time fence is January 1st of 2026 for the remote split systems that we pretty much use on everything. There was a guideline originally for January 1st of this year, 2025, for what would be considered self-contained systems, and which means, compressor, evaporator, condensing unit, all under one hood, all one continuous unit. And there was a little bit of a reprieve on that date late last year, where that's now been extended for about a 3-year period. Um, and it is a federal law. All of the manufacturers, the producers of the refrigerants, the A2Ls, that are going to replace some of these HFCs, they're all geared and moving towards those timelines. So that's what we're doing as well. And we've invested in a lot of sampling from all of our refrigeration OEMs. And we're in the process of getting training from them so that we can, install these into prototypes here in the factory and get our testing and our feet wet. There's been some issues up until late last year being able to actually get some of the new refrigerants, just because they're rolling out and a little slower than anticipated to some areas. So we've been working through that, and but it's a game changer in terms of there's a lot of record keeping that's going to be involved, even more so than what we typically do now. Uh, and there's a lot of extra components that are going to be involved because in a walk-in, you're basically talking about an enclosed space. So there has to be mitigation for leaks systems. In other words, leak detection, monitors, and then isolation valves on the equipment. So if there's a leak, it immediately shut that off. And depending on the size of the walk-in, there may have to be additional ventilation tied into that mitigation leak system so that you can ventilate the box before you go in, because these A2Ls are what's considered to be slightly, flammable with a low flame travel, but they do have hydrocarbons in there, so um, there is some flammability involved. They're not toxic, and again, they have much lower global warming potential than what we're currently using. So, order of magnitude, currently one of the most popular refrigerants that we use, especially in low temperature applications, is R404A. And that has a global warming potential of over 3,900 as a number. The refrigerant that would replace that on the A2L side, right now on paper anyway, is R454A, and that has a GWP number of only 238. So, um, but again, we got to do our testing and make sure it's apples to apples the best we can, because we are highly custom in what we do here, and we do have some really low operating temperatures. And so for us and the rest of the industry, it's learning and unlearning everything we've used and how we get certain applications and how these A2Ls are going to fit into that.
So when it comes to like changing the actual ingredients you use to keep those systems going, like if you were going from the one that you said that is existing, that has the 3,000 global warming potential to the 200 one, is it and this is just I have never sat there and done any maintenance on any walk-in unit. I know, shocking. But if I were to sit there and so today I'm using that 3,000 one, and tomorrow I want to use the 200, do I have to retrofit that entire system, or is it something just as simple as flush it out, clean it, and then, or if that's even a thing, and then put the new fuel in?
Yeah. So basically, the recommendation would be that because there's some other factors involved here, like AWF. So the older systems aren't going to be compatible with this new from a performance standpoint, and there's considerations in the compressor, the condensing unit coil, the evaporator coil, the components that are different from the existing refrigerant. So being used in the system. So and the way the law is structured, that even with what's called a 3-year buy through, sell through. So if you, had an old system and it's out there and you had, a minor repair, then you can still use that refrigerant, the old refrigerant up to a point. If you get into a situation where like you'd have to replace an evaporator or something like that, then the way the law is, as you're into that time frame, you have to replace the whole system. So it's compatible with the A2L, and that's how they're limiting and helping to phase down on the old refrigerant by having direct impact on replacing the whole system.
I feel like that's gotta I feel like you almost have to do it that way because otherwise everyone it's becomes completely cost prohibitive because everyone's trying to go out and replace their whole systems, and and not everyone, can shell out a bunch of money for a brand new system at the drop of a hat. Um, and also I should have known that it's not as easy as just, like, taking out one coolant and just putting in another one. It's never that easy.
No, no, and again, the way this is structured is it's driving, it's in fact the term that's used throughout the verbiage in there is a phase down. And so by helping to drive that to get to a system, because this is a very aggressive thing. So between 2022 and 2036, if you can imagine, in total, they're looking at about a 75% plus reduction in the HFC refrigerants, 75%. So, the first couple 3-year segments are like 30% each, and then 10%, and then 5% by the time you get to 2036. So it's a very aggressive plan. And I think, they looked at the logistics of that and said the only way we're going to do that is we have to be very aggressive on the front end.
So when it comes to, making these changes, because like you said, certain delays have been put in or certain kind of like you have a little bit more time. But I really feel like waiting until you absolutely have to make these changes is kind of the wrong move because it takes so long to kind of get the new normal established, make sure that you are getting that apples to apples change. What kind of plan so like if I for some reason am a cold temperature controlled warehouse or shipper or anyone and I have done nothing to prepare for this, not a single thing, what are some of those steps or things that I need to be aware of that maybe I need to put a little hitch in my giddy up and start looking for some alternative solutions?
So so let's just say in that example you gave, let's just say that you don't have an in-house staff, an engineering staff or whatever that's, and you are reliant on your supply base. My recommendation is similar to what we have done is, we lean heavily on our refrigeration component and system suppliers, um, because they're at the ground level. They have to, they've done the design work, the testing, everything else to get into all the different applications that we might see as a walk-in manufacturer. And if I was in the supermarket industry and I had, a lot of large walk-ins for all the different, you know, uh, retail applications, I'd be leaning hard on my walk-in supplier, who obviously would, lean on their refrigeration supplier to help get me the answers I needed to start looking at. Because most of your supermarkets are dealing with the situation where they have a large refrigerant charge. So typically, a supermarket application has what's called a large bank of compressors and refrigerant systems, and so their charge can obviously eclipse hundreds of pounds of refrigerant charge, and the rules as it pertains to the global warming potential change with that. So, given a just as an example, one of the applications was if you were less than 200 pounds of refrigerant charge, you could have a global warming potential refrigerant of like 300. If you have something greater than 200 pounds of charge, then that global warming potential number comes down to 150. So there's a lot of puts and takes there that if you were in that application and you didn't have the staff or the wherewithal in house, I would be looking to, my walk-in slash refrigeration suppliers, I'd be leaning on them heavily to make sure I understood the timing of and what I have to do with them to get those changes implemented.
This is something that I've talked about a lot on various aspects, just throughout the supply chain, and that is the importance, and you really kinda touched on it here, and that is that importance of, having those strong partners, having those strong relationships because like in this, you wanna work with someone that's gonna have your back. You don't wanna go to turn to your you don't wanna go to turn to your suppliers and say, "Okay, like, what are we doing? What's the plan here? Like,
Mhm.
how are we gonna navigate this forward?" And they're like, don't know. I guess you should probably figure it out." Like, you want those partners that are like, "Okay, here's what you have right now. Here's what it needs to be. Here's a path that we can take." It's just I think that that's so important to really when you're, like, vetting any sort of supplier is to make sure that they really kinda have your back and they're gonna do right by you and make sure that you both get to where you need to be.
One to your point, one of the mistakes that I saw over the years in commercial refrigeration, for example, is and as it pertains to walk-in, a lot of people look at it like it's an appliance, and it's not an appliance, and there's a lot of moving parts there, and there's a lot of things that you have to be cognizant of and to be able to take care of it and extend its life. And so, your bigger supermarkets, they have this huge, rack system. They've got refrigerant lines all over the building and a lot of evaporators and fans and everything else. So, um, and most of them are. They're very tied in with whoever their suppliers are, and but it's critical because this is different than things in the past. This is a federal law, and there may be pauses, but again, the industry, whether it's the people that make the refrigerants or the people that are making the equipment, everybody's moving to these dates, and it's pretty well defined all the different segments of what you have to do if you're in that segment. So, um,
The has there because you said that, like, obviously, this one's a law, it's gone through, and we have direction, we're moving forward. Has there been big changes like this in refrigerant specifically? It just feels so niche that I don't know that there's been, like, these big, broad, sweeping changes made on, like, an industry level wide before.
yeah, I mean, over time, I mean, there was uh, over the probably the last 20, 30 years in particular, there's been changes and things that have gone into effect and they've affected again everything from commercial refrigeration and air conditioning and residential and automotive and with each change to the refrigerants as the law required to do so because again they're trying to prevent affecting our ozone and all the greenhouse gas implications. Um, you know, Performance changes as you go from these different refrigerants, and you go back to the old R12, R22 days that everybody remembers. It's my age or older, and they had a certain performance, and everything was geared to that. And then, there was another change in the industry, and we went to different. And it keeps evolving. And with each one of those evolutions, you have to really go look at the system performance to make sure that it's compatible with what this new refrigerant wants. And so that's why, we're engaged right now in testing and because, we deal with some extremely low temperature applications and we want to make sure, before we get to the point and let's say we have a minus 40 box today that we can use R404A, we want to make sure that, R454A is compatible and we can get the same performance. And if not, what do we have to do to tweak the system to get it to do that? And so that's why we're moving, pretty rapidly right now so that when we get to January of 2026, we have a really good idea of what we need to buy from our suppliers and they understand and we're working on it together.
I like that you guys are taking that proactive approach of like, if we just get it done and move quickly, then we have a plan, we can move forward, we have answers for people. Because also, people that have these either pop-up walk-ins or other forms are gonna say, like, are gonna turn to you guys and be like, Are we good?" And
Yeah.
you guys could be like, "Yeah, it's fine, don't worry about it."
And I think one of the pitfalls you want to stay away from, and I can go back, 10, 15 years ago, when there were some other changes going on in the industry, and part of the industry was moving, again, to make sure they had the refrigerants ready and everything else. And part of the industry is like, we're going to do wait and see because of the cost of this. And then it all centered around, what administration was going to be in the White House. And is this, are they going to deregulate or are they going to stay with this, and so you want to be careful of that too, because again, this is a federal law, and we don't know what's going to happen. We know there's been some delays, or maybe some other delays, but I think if you sit back and wait till the end, that would not be a good thing. So,
Yeah, I don't see that working well because if you're worried about it now being expensive when it goes into effect and everyone starts clamoring for this, it's just going to be a little bit more expensive.
and we've been told, just as a reference point, depending on the system, the application, over where you're at today, system wise, it could be anywhere from 20 to 40% increase in price because of the additional components and the mitigation for the leaks and everything else. So, um, but the thing of it is, it's going to be like that for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
It's kind of one of those get in while you can kind of things. So okay, so kind of looking to the future, do you see any other like legislation like this coming around, or do you think this is maybe going to kind of be it for at least maybe the next 10 years or so?
well, this is such a comprehensive, um, law, and there's a lot of puts and takes to it. There's a lot of parts to it. And what I would say is that the other thing we have to be cognizant of, in addition to this, is the Department of Energy is still going to come forward with their AWEF regulations and efficiencies. Making sure that the systems are more efficient, and that's all centered around making sure that you're using the least amount of energy, possible to run these systems. So there'll be efficiency. And then the other thing you have to be cognizant of is even the states, depending on the state, like California, for example, could have a little bit different timeline, a little bit more rigorous timeline in affecting some of the GWP rules, for example, and some of which are in place now. So, if you sell a walk-in to California, you have to be cognizant of that right now and make sure that meets their regulations, the type of refrigerant, et cetera. So there's multiple parts to this, but the states also could have their own, which either are in parallel or more substantial than what timelines are federally.
It's a lot to keep track of, if I'm being honest.
Bam.
All right. So, in a slightly less hard to keep track of way, Kevin, there's a question that everybody comes in the show has to answer, and it could potentially be the most difficult question that we have today, even after everything we've just been through. Is cereal considered a soup?
In my world, I don't consider it a soup. I I have been I have been in the situation where I've made it soupy because I added too much milk. But to me, soup is soup, and cereal is cereal. I don't see the two being one and the same.
I am so glad that you are on the correct line of thinking, and it's because it is the correct line of thinking. I respect those that think others, but it's not. It's two completely separate things, and I'm glad that you see the light there.
I wouldn't ever envision myself eating Captain Crunch in vegetable broth. So that's just
Ugh.
that's not going to happen.
That sounds disgusting. I can't picture that. That's disgusting. Um, so if anyone has a good Captain Crunch and vegetable broth recipe, or if they have any questions on kind of how to make these changes, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and if you send a message into polarking.com, that's another way. But I am available on both.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary. Glad I got to talk with you and enjoyed the conversation.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on FreightWaves TV, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.